have some polls, and you can put your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And if you're on social media, the hashtag for this webinar series is #CircularCeramics. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Our keynote speaker is Spanish MEP Susana Solis Perez. Susana Solis joined the European Parliament in 2019. She's an industrial engineer by training, and she's part of the Renew Europe Party. Susana is going to talk about the circular economy as an opportunity for the competitiveness of the refractory industry. Thank you, Susana. Over to you.
Thank you very much for your kind presentation. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank Cerame-Unie for inviting me to this debate. I am especially excited because as an engineer, the ceramics sector is very close to me, given the relevance it has in the industry and the Spanish economy. And also, as a policymaker, it is an opportunity to share with you the challenges and needs facing the sector, especially at such a timely moment when, as you know, the European Parliament has an enormous amount of legislative activity on environmental and energy issues that will affect the industry. And I think we all agree that the COVID-19 crisis has shaken Europe and the world to its core and brought to light new challenges for the European Union, showcase how vulnerable value chains are within the EU and how dependent we are on third countries. And at the same time, it has been an important wake-up call, reminding us of the need to have more autonomy in critical sectors and a resilient industrial sector. But we will not get there with business as usual. And by going back to the status quo, we need to go faster and do things better. We cannot simply think of the use phase anymore, but we must adopt a life cycle thinking for all manufacturing decisions. And for this, we should look to circular economy. Circular economy is our opportunity to make change happen and invest in our future, to emerge stronger by creating opportunities for growth and prosperity while reducing dependence on primary materials, energy, and water, and minimizing waste generation. And I am glad that circular economy remains a key priority on the EU political agenda, and that 37% of next generation EU will be spent directly on the European Green Deal objectives, aiming to kickstart a European renovation wave and make the EU a leader in the circular economy. As President von der Leyen said in the State of the Union speech last month, this is not just an environmental or economic project. It needs to be a new cultural project for Europe. And I very much agree, because when we talk about circular economy, we have to see it from three spheres: environmental, social, and economic. For sure, it is essential in reducing our environmental footprint and in reaching the Union's climate targets. But we have also to see the social aspect. Circular economy brings significant social opportunities, and it can boost employment by creating green jobs. We are talking about 700,000 jobs by 2030. And the economic aspect. It is the only way for Europe and European companies to remain competitive and reduce vulnerability of our value chains. And as you know, the European Parliament has recently presented our own initiative report on circular economy. The rapporteur, Jan Uytema, is from my political group, Renew Europe. And last week, we had the deadline for amendments, and we are expecting a huge number of amendments. Once finalized, this report will define the position and level of ambition of the Parliament. But I can tell you from my political group, we have been calling for strong incentives for innovation, sustainable businesses and markets for climate neutral and circular products, with resource efficiency, zero pollution, and waste prevention as key priorities. And I think Europe can't build a circular economy without focusing on the built environment. Everything around us, our houses, buildings, bridges, cars, planes, defense equipment, medical equipment, contain refractory materials and metals. They are key for our economy, our industry, our competitiveness, and our future. And in this transition to circular economy, the refractory industry has a key role to play because of the very long service life of materials and their high potential for reuse, recycling, and recovery of critical raw materials. My first message today would be, we need to remove regulatory barriers because the opportunity for the sector is clear, but we also need to address the hurdles that are hampering circular solutions from succeeding and work together with all stakeholders to put in place measures and legislation that provides legal certainty to companies and foster innovation. Because when looking at Circular Economy Action Plan, our starting point shall be to prevent waste in the first place. Given that 80% of products' environmental impacts are determined at the design stage, we have to act in the design phase. The new Sustainable Product Policy Framework proposed by the Commission, as well as the industrial strategy, should be guided by the principle designing out of waste. And we need eco-design measures that ensure that products are fit for circularity and rules that reduce the total environmental and resource footprint of European production and consumption. So our priority is prevention of waste, but if there is waste, then we need to ensure that we recover high-quality secondary raw materials and critical metals. For this, we call for waste reduction targets, as well as an EU-level target for resource efficiency where technically feasible. Because resource efficiency is not only about using less, but also using better. And we call for comprehensive common sustainability standards for materials in the EU as an opportunity to divert additional waste away from landfills into reuse and recycling. And of course, a necessary precondition for circular economy is innovation. And European businesses are frontrunners in circular innovations and solutions. But innovation is not only necessary for developing circular businesses models and new production and recycling technologies. It is of vital importance at all stages of their raw materials value chain, from mining to waste recovery. Unfortunately, in Europe, we are heavily dependent on imports of raw materials from a few only countries. But resources exist in Europe mainly as a secondary resources from industrial waste and urban mines. Valorizing these resources requires coordination and collaboration between researchers, businesses, and public authorities to harmonize technologies, processes, and services, and remove market barriers to establish a well-functioning European market for secondary raw materials. This is one priority, and this will require common standards and harmonized end-of-waste criteria in line with the Waste Framework Directive to ensure high-quality waste recovery. And here, an important point for my group when addressing these barriers is to ask always for appropriate impact assessments and science-based policymaking to establish those criteria, standards, and definitions. Digitalization plays also a key role. The new digital technologies such as 3D printing, artificial intelligence, or the Internet of Things will be a revolution for the refractory sector. Unfortunately, the building and construction industry remains one of the less advanced when it comes to the use of digital technologies. We need to promote digital technologies. For example, with blockchain technology, a product can be tracked from the raw materials all the way to the consumer, increasing transparency and proof of authenticity. Digital product passports can document carbon footprint and sustainability principles and make this information more easily accessible to consumers in a digital format. And artificial intelligence and 3D printing offer opportunities for manufacturers to streamline their production processes, such as made-to-order production and fast batch production. So, removing barriers for a well-functioning European market for secondary raw materials, innovation, and digitalization. My second message is that we need to make circular economy a business model for companies and consumers, and to emphasize the specific role that SMEs are playing in a transition to a circular economy. Businesses should consider the implementation of the circular economy not as a burden, but as an opportunity, because manufacturing costs could be significantly reduced if the materials are reintroduced into the value chain, and therefore the industry needs a clear political signal to invest in the design, collection, recycled content, and recycling on the long term. Circular economy will be only successful if it opens new opportunities to SMEs, as they are the driving forces of the European economy. You know it very well because in the ceramic sector, 80% of the companies are SMEs. So we need here a coherent approach that encompasses the different strategies in the EU. Circular Economy Action Plan, the industrial strategy, the SME strategy, and the digital agenda, in order to create incentives for innovation and new business models. And in this sense, I think we have to foster the green public procurement, because it will boost the internal market for sustainability products. And in this sense, we support the proposal of the European Commission to establish a minimum mandatory green public procurement. Public authorities are major consumers, and they should lead by example and ensure that their procurement is green. GPP has the potential to send strong signals into the market to develop innovative, sustainable, and more circular solutions which can be adopted by the private sector. And the loop is not complete without the consumers. We need a behavioral change, and here education has a crucial role to play. Extensive communication campaigns will help consumers understand the environmental impacts of their own behavior and help them recycle, reuse, and favor materials with recycled content. My third and last message is the funds, the regional policy and the European funds. The EU recovery plan should be used to put in place circular economy initiatives and infrastructure. Of course, for the implementation of all these measures and in order to stimulate and scale up circular economy actions, we need strong cooperations between governments, academia, and businesses. Huge investments are needed, and the private-public collaboration is essential. The EU recovery plan should be used to put in place circular economy initiatives and infrastructure. But also, regional policy can be a vital tool. As a member of the Regi Committee of the Parliament, I truly believe in the role that cohesion policy can play in delivering the circular economy. Cohesion policy is not only about money. It offers a policy framework for integrated regional development, focusing on the particular strengths of each region to deliver the circular economy. It works in partnership with actors on the ground and helps regional authorities with capacity building. Waste prevention, eco-design, and recovery of key materials will create local green jobs in recycling, reuse, and product innovation sectors. Important research and innovation funding opportunities are available to develop new and better products and to recover materials and metals, and we work here in the Parliament to promote synergies among all the different funds: Horizon Europe, LIFE, structural funds, European funds. My conclusion: it is clear that circular economy is an important opportunity for the competitiveness of the refractory industry. What we need is a systemic change towards circularity, a paradigm shift, and doing so means wide-scale implementation of circular business models and effective policies for materials and design, production and distribution, use and reuse, recycling, and recovery of critical materials. The future will be what we make of it. If we want a more sustainable economic model for the planet, we need to work for it, and we need to do it now. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Susana Solis, for this fantastic speech. You've got us off to a really good start. And thank you also for your understanding of this sector. It's clear that you know what you're talking about when you talk about refractories and ceramics. I know that you need to leave us now to go to another event. So thanks again. Have a great day, and goodbye.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. So while I invite our next speaker up to the Zoom floor, we're going to have a poll for the audience. So here's the poll. What regulatory constraints are hampering current efforts from the industry to implement circular economy targets? And our choices are chemicals legislation, cross-border transportation of secondary materials, different interpretations of end of waste and byproducts criteria among member states. So we'll leave you a moment to answer that question. And when you've answered that question, I'll introduce our next speaker. I should say we have a slight change to the program. Unfortunately, Mattia Pellegrini was unable to join us. And at the last minute, his colleague, Giel Berends, has very kindly jumped in. So we'd really like to warmly welcome Giel Berends. He's a policy officer at DG Environment in the European Commission. He's going to talk today about the EU's Circular Economy Action Plan. And again, we're very grateful to you for stepping in at the last minute. The floor is yours, Giel.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much also for organizing this event. Indeed, I learned about this event 15 minutes ago, so I'm maybe not very well prepared and I look a bit shabby, but please forgive me for that. I will tell you something indeed about the Circular Economy Action Plan and focus primarily on construction demolition waste, as I'm a policy officer in the waste unit of DG Environment. That's a unit that falls under our Directorate for the Circular Economy. So, as you probably all know, construction demolition waste is one of the main streams of waste that is generated within the EU. It's more than 30% of all the waste generated in the EU is construction demolition waste. So it makes a lot of sense that we try to make the most out of this waste stream possible. As such, our main two goals for this waste stream are, on the one hand, that we want to try to prevent harm on the environment or human health that is linked to the management of this waste stream. But on the other hand, want to make sure that we reap the full potential of construction demolition waste to contribute to a circular economy. And although there are certain limitations, construction demolition waste definitely has a high potential for recycling and reuse, and some of its components, like metals, already have a high resource value, while others, like minerals, have a lower value but can nonetheless be easily reprocessed into other materials. Just to give a bit of an impression of where we are, as part of the first Circular Economy Action Plan, so that was adopted by the previous Commission, EU waste legislation was revised, including the Waste Framework Directive, and this happened in 2018. In that revision, we did not alter the recovery target for construction demolition waste, but we greatly increased the importance of waste prevention, and that's linked a bit to what the previous speaker was saying. So the target for construction demolition waste that we have enshrined in waste legislation at the moment is that all member states shall take measures to ensure that by 2020, 70% of construction and demolition waste by weight is prepared for reuse, recycled, or other material recovery. But as I said, we did increase the importance of waste prevention and strengthen the provisions on that. So linked to the construction sector, we explicitly required member states to promote repair and reuse. Also in relation to construction demolition activities, and to reduce waste generation. Of course, if construction demolition waste is not separated at the source, it can contain hazardous waste, and the mixture can bring particular risks to the environment and also hamper the recovery of this waste stream. As such, in 2018, we also strengthened the provisions on selective demolition and sorting systems. So member states have to take measures to promote selective demolition in order to enable the removal and safe handling of hazardous substances, and to facilitate the reuse and high quality recycling by selective removal of those hazardous materials as well. And they have to ensure that they establish sorting systems for construction demolition waste for at least a number of fractions, and those are wood, mineral fractions, metal, glass, plastic, and plaster. Then a step forward to the new commission coming in. Within 100 days of the new commission entering office, I think you say it like that in English, entering office, they presented the Green Deal, the European Green Deal. And this Green Deal puts a lot of importance as well on the construction sector. And one of the main deliveries of the Green Deal was the Circular Economy Action Plan, and that was presented in March. I think it was one of the last things that the Commission actually did before the whole country went into lockdown. This Circular Economy Action Plan also gives a very prominent place to the construction sector as a contributor to the transformation of the EU towards a circular economy. It has indeed a few key deliverables, which is one of them is the sustainable products policy framework. This is a framework which, well, it's still in its early phases, but it's aimed to make sustainable products the norm instead of a niche product. So now you see that sustainable production is still often a niche and on a small scale, and therefore it comes at a premium price. And what we want to do is to try to make sure through a revision of the Eco-Design Directive, amongst other measures, to try to make this a more mainstream endeavor and to make products reusable, repairable, and to create very sustainable products. This framework will be rolled out step by step, but first focusing on a number of key product value chains that are identified in the action plan, and that includes construction as well. If you look at the circular economy action plan's ambition for construction sector, that's quite high. In order to make sure that it contributes to the fullest to the transformation to a circular economy, we will revise the CPR, the Construction Product Regulation. We will indeed look at end of waste criteria, as was highlighted as well by the previous speaker. I have to say there that in the 2018 revision of the Waste Framework Directive, we have already revised the provisions on end of waste criteria. So that means that member states are encouraged to adopt end of waste criteria as well when they fulfill the demands that are identified in the directive. But still, we will see if it's necessary and feasible to adopt further criteria on an EU scale, so horizontal criteria. Work on this is starting. Of course, we have already done a lot of preparatory work in the past years, but work on this is starting. And I just want to let you know that we also are organizing a circular economy stakeholder platform on the 3rd and 4th of November. And one of the issues there is also waste policy, and we will focus as well on this specific topic, so end of waste criteria. I didn't have time to check whether registrations are still open, but I assume so because it's all digital. So I assume that you can still attend if you're interested in this particular subject. One thing I referred to in the beginning was the recovery target for construction and demolition waste. In the Circular Economy Action Plan, we have also committed or restated our ambition to revise those. So as mentioned in the Waste Framework Directive, we will by 2024 review the target or assess the feasibility and the necessity of doing so. And we will there also look at material specific fractions. So at the moment, the target is still a target for the whole construction demolition waste stream as a whole. But we will assess whether this suffices or whether we have to go for a preparing for reuse and recycling target for individual streams as well. We have started work on that together with the DG JRC, so the Joint Research Center, and we are making a first scoping study of this. And we are, for the moment, focusing as well under this study on insulation material, but in the years to come, we will also look at other waste streams. And like Ms. Perez said, the whole aim of our future revisions of EU waste legislation, because we have between now and 2024, we have to revise, I would say 70% of EU waste legislation, the regulations and the directives. And all of those will be revised with the view of waste prevention. So that's the underlying aim in all of them. Because as you see, we have had EU waste legislation since the 1970s, and this has had a great impact on recycling in the EU. But now we want to take the next step and go for the top of the waste hierarchy and focus also on waste prevention. I think for now I leave it at that, because I understand we still have a Q&A afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giel. And I hope that in future you don't prepare any of your speeches because you don't need to. That was great. Thank you.
That's very kind. Thank you.
So you can now pop your camera off, and we have another poll before our next speaker. So Cerame-Unie will launch the next poll, and it's about how to best achieve circular economy targets. So the question is, to achieve circular economy targets, do you think public incentives like the ones renewable energies are benefiting from are needed? And that's a yes/no answer. So that probably is not going to take too long for our audience to come up with an answer to that one. And while the audience is voting, I can invite our next speaker to put his camera on. Christian. Just give them a couple of moments more for the poll. And if you've seen any of the other Cerame-Unie webinars, and there are a couple more on the YouTube channel, you'll see that we have a format of a politician, a policymaker, and then an industry speaker. And so today our industry speaker is Dr. Christian Meirer. He is the Managing Director of Refractories Cements, and on behalf of Cerame-Unie, he's the chair of the PRE Safety and Environment Committee. Now, PRE is a member of Cerame-Unie. It represents the refractories industry. And Christian is Swiss and he loves the mountains. So I'm going to hand over to you, Christian. If you could take us through a nice skip through the Swiss mountains, I think that would be perfect this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, for the kind introduction. Today we stick to the refractories, I'm afraid. So, and I would like to pick up pretty much where two previous speakers left off, and would give you an introduction into our best practices and challenges that we have, from the point of view of the refractory industry. So if I can get the first slide, then. Thank you very much. Just quickly coming back to what refractories are, and if you have a fireplace at your home, then you know that in the back of your fireplace there are those Schematic bricks, and these are pretty much refractories. Today we're talking about the industrial applications, and their refractories play a fundamentally important role in insulating and protecting the equipment from the process. And pretty much all high temperature industrial processes are using refractories, such as steel making, cement, petrochemical processes, glass, ceramics, etc. On the right-hand side, you see a bunch of crazy lines. Now you're not supposed to be able to read them all, but you know what it should represent, all the interactions between, or where the refractories play an important role. So needless to say that without those, you would have no cars, no planes, no trains, and so on. So they are a thin layer, but play an important role in industrial processes. On the next slide, you can see that I'm representing today the PRE, which is the the Federation of the European Refractory Producers, which was founded in 1953. We unite members from 16 countries and represent an annual turnover of above 3.5 billion euros, and we employ nearly 20,000 people. Now, if I'm talking about recycling or circular economy in the refractory industry, I would like to focus today on three topics. First of all, markets and economics. You know, what are the costs to recycle material? You know, that the market price and logistics and handling play an important role. Then we talk quickly about, you know, that the current situation is that we have highly specialized refractory plants all over Europe, but they require a high initial investment. So it's not that easy to build up and set up, you know, new refractory plants. And then the third one that plays a big part is the logistics. You know, so collecting and moving recycled materials across the EU is a fairly big challenge. The second part is technical feasibility. The refractory industry is already fairly successful with reusing ceramics from all kinds of other industries. You know, Mr. Behrens talked about, you know, the construction and demolition waste. For example, you know, tiles are widely used. We can also recycle sophisticated materials and then reuse them in less demanding applications. That's also very successfully done. A big challenge is, you know, how to clean used refractories and make them usable for another life cycle, which I'm quickly talking about that one then later on. And the last focus is the regulatory framework. We still see big obstacles in the material classification, and also, you know, the difference between raw material versus byproducts versus secondary raw materials. If we talk about markets and economics, then what we typically see now is that with the increased demand of recycled materials, this will also push up the corresponding market value. And in that regard, then suddenly, you know, those materials are competing against virgin materials, and those have a highly volatile price tag, which makes it hard to plan and deal with it. Then what I mentioned before, you know, logistics, so in other words, transportation, the handling, the storage, and the processing, you know, you have to dry, you have to separate, etc., play a decisive role in the economics. That all comes with a price tag as well. And then, like I mentioned, we have few but highly specialized refractory plants across the European Union. That means, you know, introducing another material stream is sometimes difficult, and it corresponds also to a price tag to make it usable in those plants. And because we have few plants, you know, they are far apart. Most probably the material has to travel a long way until it reaches again, you know, a refractory plant where it can be reused. However, we do have some best practices. If you can go quickly back one slide, we have best practices, you know, but then almost always, you know, the end user is in close proximity to the actual refractory plant, where the logistics are then much easier to organize. And in those cases, you know, we have bricks that contain up to 75% of recycled material coming back from our end user. The next slide then shows, you know, a little bit the technical side, and one key parameter is consistency. So and that's with the recycled material, or it's always a key part, and also very difficult to achieve, is the consistency. And particularly because our customer expect from us a very consistent product, and to achieve that with an inconsistent quality of our raw materials, that's a big challenge. So that's one key part that we have to keep in mind. And also with this comes, you know, how to clean recycled materials. Our materials that have been used in one of those high temperature processes are often contaminated with minor elements. They are coming out of the process of our customer. And exactly this contamination plays a decisive role when it comes to the refractoriness of our products, which can be greatly reduced. And therefore, we have to make sure that we clean those materials, and this is not always that simple. So if we have recycled ceramics from a different application, and again, you know, for example, tiles, then this is a little bit easier. When we take back refractories from our own customer, it can be quite challenging. So you see on the right-hand side in this picture, you know, you see the cross section of a brick, and the top part, you know, the top third, you know, where it's densified, you know, that has been contaminated by those materials, and it's pretty challenging to clean that in an economical way. In other products, we use, you know, and you see on the left-hand side of the, which is called the best practice, you know, we have materials that take up to or contain up to 80% of recycled materials coming back from an application with our customers. And the third part, you know, on the next slide, is then the regulatory framework, which is plays still a key part in this entire game. So we have, you know, the national legislations. They are limiting the use of those secondary raw materials. We still have way different classifications for used refractory materials in the various countries of the European Union, and those different classifications lead to different interpretations of the end of waste and the byproducts. So the very same material can be considered as a raw material in one country, and on the other hand, as a waste in another country. So that is a big challenge for us. And also linked to this is then the cross-border transportation of secondary raw materials. So, you know, to transport a secondary raw material between member states is always a very complex process, and leads to overburden, and therefore also to unnecessary costs. And then those transportation costs, they limit the uptake and the competitive advantage that a recycled material actually should have, you know, against a virgin material. So let me already conclude. You know, what we see is that the refractory industry has developed some best practices for recycling, which applies to all kinds of different applications and products. However, we still have some technical challenges for a variety of products, you know, where the solutions for a high utilization of those recycled raw materials are not economical. You know, I'm talking about this so-called cleaning process. You know, how to do this in an economical way. That's still a major challenge. And if you look at the recycled raw materials themselves, you know, then the cost structure there is dominated by logistics. First of all, you know, those materials have to travel sometimes a long distance, which makes them costly. The availability. So if you rely on raw materials coming from a demolition site or a construction site, then you need to have those demolition site and construction site. And if those sources are drying up, then it's a struggle to get to new sources. And eventually processing requirements, you know, so the drying, the handling, the storage, all these steps that you need to take until it can be introduced in our own manufacturing process are sometimes cumbersome and require some cost. And with this, you know, they compete against a very volatile market volatile market prices of the corresponding virgin materials that you could use instead. And my third conclusion point is, you know, that the regulatory framework across the European Union should create a single market for waste. You know, that would help tremendously if we talk about, you know, moving those recycling materials back to the refractory plants for reutilization. I think that's it from my side. Thank you very much, and back to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Christian, for that super overview. I have loads of questions, but I have to hold on to them for now. I'll invite you to go off camera so that we can have our next poll come up. Thanks again, Christian. And so we have one more poll. And this poll looks at how to increase the uptake of circular practices in the refractory industry. What do you think? What would increase the uptake? Creating a single market for secondary raw materials, implementing economic incentives, or fostering research and innovation? And while you think about that, I'll invite our next speaker, Rinus, to put his camera on and be ready to join me. We'll just give a few moments for the poll. So our next speaker, we're very fortunate today. We're joined by a customer. We're not only talking to people within the ceramic industry, we have a customer from the steel industry. So the steel industry uses refractory technologies. I've seen that 70% of all refractories are used in the steel industry, according to the World Refractories website. So we're joined today by Rinus Sebring from Tata Steel, and he's the manager of technical refractories at Tata Steel's Center of Expertise. So Rinus, I'm just going to hand over to you and you can tell us how it is from the customer perspective.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm honored that I'm invited to speak in this webinar. And I'm going to tell something about what we do with our refractory waste and what we do with recycling of refractory waste. Tata Steel has two main production facilities. One is in Port Talbot in Wales, one is in the Netherlands, here in Muiden. I'm going to speak mainly about what we're doing in Muiden with recycling to make it a little bit easier for me for my presentation. If we then go to the next slide. That was the first slide. Can we? Yes, thank you. Can we go one back, please? One back, please. We'll leave it like this. So when I was preparing this webinar, I looked through some presentations. And I came to this presentation that I used 4 years ago, and it gives in a very simple and detailed way an overview of what's important for we as a steel maker for refractories. As you can understand, we are a steel maker, so refractories are only a tool. It's a very important tool to make steel, but nevertheless still a tool. So the requirements that we have for refractories, you can see it a little bit. What we like from our equipment is a very high availability. We want to make steel and not to do too many repairs. We need a high capacity. You can see here in the picture on the right, you see some steel ladles from us. They are transported by cranes. The cranes are limited in what they can carry. So if we can make the ladles a little bit lighter, so thinner refractories or lighter refractories, that's beneficial for us. A very important part, of course, for the refractories is safety, health and environment, especially safety. We really don't want to have any breakouts. You can imagine that if a ladle has a hole and the steel goes through it, it comes on the bottom and you can see that people are walking over there. So that can be extremely dangerous. The regulation on the materials for health is also increasing a lot. So we are also trying to keep our people safe when they are wrecking the ladles. And we like to do as much as possible for the environment, that at least we try to reuse the materials as much as possible. Of course, we want to have good, predictable quality of steel, so this refractory shouldn't be interfering too much with our quality of steel. And last but not least, we also want to have very low cost, of course. We are a commercial company. That means that we want to have low refractory costs, but also that we have minimal energy losses through the wall. If you can click one time on the slide, then you see that the reason why I picked this slide is that by surprise, I saw that I put it in 2 times recycling. And that tells you also a little bit that it's an important issue for us. Of course, for environmental reasons, but not last at all, is also that we can use to lower our cost. And I will show you that it also can be beneficial, that it even brings money instead of only costing money. A very important one is in the red circle, and that's also already mentioned by our previous speaker. We want to have a predictable life. That means that we want to have a very consistent refractory. Next slide, please. So this gives an overview of what we are doing with our refractory waste. We use in a Muiden approximately 7 kilograms of refractories per ton of steel. We are producing around 7 million tons of steel when there's no corona. That means that if I calculate it correctly, very quickly, it's around 50,000 tons of refractories that we're using every year. Part of the refractories are purchased external, that's the biggest part, but we are lucky in Muiden, we also have our own brick facility to produce some bricks. And that's relatively special, where you see that in, let's say, Japan or Korea, steel plants are very closely linked to refractory suppliers. In China, a lot of steel producers are even owning refractory plants. In Europe, that's not the case. Only a few steel plants still have their own refractory production facility. And Muiden is one, and one of the others that I can remember is voestalpine Steel in Linz. If we go then to our waste streams, it's not so good to see, I think, but that are the blue arrows. Approximately 25% of our refractory waste goes into fluxes or additions to slag to make our slag more useful for our steel production. It's cheaper than buying new material from outside, so for us that's a good way of recycling part of our refractory waste. The middle one is the low value application. I called it like that. It's not dumped. However, that's the stream we still don't like because we still have to pay to get rid of it. It's not a lot and it's used for good applications like road constructions. But nevertheless, we like to have recycling that also has a little bit more value. So we are working on that to get the stream a little bit lower. A big part is also simply sold to third parties. And at the end, most of that material is going to refractory suppliers again, which use it as recycling in their product. The biggest and of the most important part, what I want to talk about is the green arrow on the right. That goes back to our brick plant. We started approximately 12 years ago with seeing if we could also use recycling in our own bricks that we are using. And that's a very beneficial one. As you see, it works very well. And the big advantage of this stream is, except that it really has lower cost than using virgin materials, so that's already a benefit. It also has an extra benefit because of the recycling, we can produce refractory materials that are a little bit lighter than when we use virgin materials, which is beneficial for our production so that we also can produce more steel. So except lower cost, we also have some benefits in our production. It is even so successful that at a certain moment we didn't have enough internal recycling material anymore. So we also started to buy external recycling material. The recycling material that is sold to third parties doesn't mean that it comes back always with recycling from our suppliers. On the contrary, I think that most of the refractory waste that we produce and sell is not coming back to us. However, the part that we buy externally with recycling is sometimes coming from our biggest competitors, which for some reason don't like to have that material. We are using that even in materials up to 80% of recycling. Next slide, please. Aspects to consider when you're using refractory products. There are much more aspects, but I only choose the most important one. As also the previous speaker already said, for us, one of the most important things is that refractory behavior in the steel plant is predictable. For some installations, we have very good scanners or other tools to measure the wear of refractories and then to avoid that we get breakout. But we also have applications where we don't have any means of controlling the refractory wear. That means that we have to be sure it doesn't wear faster than in the previous time. Otherwise, you have the chance of a risk of a breakout. An important part of that one is to have an honest and proactive communication between the refractory supplier and us, the steel producer, especially on making sure that when for some reason the recycling material is not there anymore, that they at least can explain on beforehand so that we can predict early failures or even breakouts. If a supplier wants to use recycling material, we are not against it, but very important is that they have a stable, consistent, and a long-term flow of recycling material. I will come back on that later. And very important, refractories shouldn't change their recipe without informing us. That simply gives a risk. Another big problem if you want to implement recycling material is the time for implementation in the steel plant is extremely long. Next slide, please. So this gives a little bit an overview on how long it takes. If we want to introduce a new material or a new product in our steel plant, the first things we are doing is asking our R&D center, our technical center, to give the potential benefits and also the potential risk. That only takes a few months, but it's very important that we are not going to do trials in the plant before we are sure that we know about all the risk. Then we go for the trial phase, and the trial phase takes very long. First, normally do some small trials in one ladle. We look if there's really no big risk, and if the risk is not too high, we can go for a longer trial. At the end, this whole period can take from 5 till sometimes up to 2 years or even more. If then finally the solution is positive and we want to change over, then we have to implement. That means that we have to make sure that our stock of our old material is decreased and this new material is increased. That can also take up to a few months to a half year. So this whole process of coming from one product to the other one takes approximately between 10 to up to more than 2 years, depending on the application. You can also understand that a supplier that only wants to use refractory because they have a pile of recycled waste material left and put it in is not very interesting for us because they have to be able to deliver several years. And that means also that every change in recipe has to go through this whole process, and it takes a long time. Then we go to the next slide, please. So, in summary, Recycling is for us a very important issue from an environment point of view, but to be honest, also very simple for a value in use point of view. It's cheaper, it can lower our cost, and makes also that our production can be cheaper. Important to realize is that it's not only for recycling material, but also for new materials in recycling. It takes a long time from the idea to implementing in our plant. And that means that if you want to do that, they have to make sure that also in 2 years' time, that recycling material is still there. Open and clear communication between a refractory supplier and steel producer in general speeds up the process of using recycling material. The main reason for that one is we have to trust the refractory supplier that they are always able to deliver a constant and consistent product. And as last one, because that's an important one, besides that recycling is simply lowering refractory cost, sometimes it also can have extra benefits that virgin materials sometimes don't have. So it's not only trying to get rid of the recycling material, it's also at the end of making a little bit more money. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Venus, for that interesting presentation. So now we're going to share the results from the poll. So Venus, you can put your camera off for a second and we'll get those polls on the screen, the results. Okay, here's the first one. What regulatory constraints are hampering current efforts from the industry to implement circular economy targets? And we have a very clear winner. Different interpretations of end of waste and byproducts criteria among the member states, with 75% of that vote. And then the second one. To achieve circular economy targets, do you think public incentives like the ones renewable energies are benefiting from are needed? Well, the surprise here is that 8% of people say no, but 92% of people say yes. So clearly there's a belief that some public support and public incentives are needed. And that links a bit to what Susanna Solis was saying in the beginning about needing to use some of the European funding mechanisms for circular economy transition. And the last poll. What would increase the uptake of circular practices in the refractory industry? We have a clear winner for creating a single market for secondary raw materials, and that's 51% of the vote. And behind that, implementing economic incentives with 27% and fostering research and innovation with 22%. Thank you for everyone who voted in the polls. Now I'd like to invite all of our speakers to put their cameras on. You can keep your microphones off until you want to speak. And if I can be a little bit cheeky, I'd also like to invite Patrick Bicard to join the panel. He was only supposed to speak later, but I know that he's got a lot of information that he could add to the panel debate. So if that's okay, Patrick, we'd like to invite you to join us up here. Patrick's president of PRE, the European Refractories Producer Federation, and he's also president of operations and technology at Vesuvius. So now we have all of our speakers. We've got some questions from the audience. I've got lots of questions that came up, so we'll get through as much as we can now in our Q&A section. So where to start? I have a question for Giel to start with. How does the European Commission monitor the implementation of the end of waste criteria in the member states? Is that question clear?
Okay, thank you very much. So in the Waste Framework Directive, it is stated that member states have to notify the Commission when they adopt end of waste criteria. And also as part of our research to assess the feasibility of adopting horizontal, so EU-wide end of waste criteria, we will also assess the adoption of end of waste criteria in the member states and to identify best practices, etc. So also as part of that exercise, we will look into it.
Okay, super, thank you. And then I have a question for Christian and possibly Patrick as well. And even Renus might have something to say about this, but there's an expectation from end users, apparently, that refractory products, if they're recycled, that they should be cheaper. How do you get around this? I mean, is that in fact the case? Are they cheaper? And if not, how do you deal with that?
It's not necessarily the case, you know. I mean, it could be, but it's hard to give a general rule, you know. And one of the main issues is the highly variable price of virgin materials. You know, some for various reasons those materials fluctuate very, very highly, and that's in most cases now gives you a difficult outlook, you know, to have a prognosis, you know, what your price or what your cost going to be, and therefore what the price going to be. So it's not always the case. Sometimes, you know, it could be, yes, but it's not a general rule. So it's a good question, but a tough question to answer, right? I mean, Patrick or Renus, you might chime in.
So if I may, for us, if we want to use recycling, normally the reason we are starting is because adding recycling material, the refractory supplier tells us that they can lower the cost. So that's the main reason. If that's for the long term, because as I already said, if it's introduced, you can't switch very quickly. So if at a certain moment recycling becomes more expensive, we are not able to change very quickly.
Okay, and the price aspect?
At the end, let's say the main reasons to use recycling material in our refractories is because we want to have lower cost.
And I'm going to come back to you in a minute about that. Patrick, did you have anything you wanted to add about this? Like managing the expectations of the end customer.
Thank you, Kathleen. Yes, as I think Renus explained very clearly why we need a stable flow of recycled material. Takes long time to qualify new sources, new materials. And in the meantime, virgin material prices are very volatile. So in my 12 years with the industry, I've never seen periods where this really worked. At some point in time, recycled material is cheaper, but then the price of virgin materials drops and recycling becomes more expensive. So if we talk about incentivizing the use of recycled material, something has to be done there. We want to use more and more recycled material, but the economics need to work. And today, they don't, in many ways, they do not work as well as they should.
But it sounds like there's a volatility in the price of the raw materials, but then also in the secondary materials, the recycled materials. And so it just maybe complicates the picture some, but there's always that volatility.
Yes and no, because the recycled raw material prices will follow the virgin raw material in some respect. But at the end of the day, you have to look at the basic costs. And the basic costs are not the same. On one side, it's a pure market price. On the other side, there is a cost of recycling and everything that Christian and Renus have already explained. But this is more manageable. So the key point to develop recycling is to make sure that economics can be maintained in periods that really allows the development of the industry.
I want to come to Giel to get the policymaker perspective, and I know you haven't had any chance to prepare for this, so don't feel obliged to answer anything if you can't. But I heard a lot of arguments from our speakers about the economics. And yet I hear from, from the Parliament, from the Commission, that it's about more than economics. It's about sustainability. It's about the circular economy, which is environmental, social, and economic. How do you feel about this difficult balance, really, between the economics of keeping, jobs and industry in Europe and still promoting a more circular economy? Is there a way to balance those things?
I think both things are in line with each other and not opposing each other, of course. The aim of the Circular Economy Action Plan is also to create an environment in which environmentally sustainable initiatives from the private sector are able to flourish. So we have to make sure that we create a legislative environment that is stimulating the practices that we want to stimulate and stops the practices that we want to stop. And besides that, we have research and funding, or research grants and funding available to stimulate maybe a bit niche and avant-garde initiatives that we want to support. And the initiatives that I mentioned earlier on, so the revision of the target, looking into end of waste criteria on a European level, but also considering setting minimum requirements for GPP for procurement, are all ways in which we would like to try to give a push to these good initiatives and to make the business case work as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And I have a question from the floor for the industry participants then, because the research and development and debate around reusing, recycling refractory materials, it's been going on for a long time, according to our person in the audience. How do we speed up this transition to using more circular uses of refractory materials? Anyone from industry like to comment on this?
Yeah, if I may speak up, I think it's mainly this combination of those three parameters. It's not just technical. It's not just a technical issue, right? I mean, so yes, there are some major challenges still ahead of us in the technical field, but it is convoluted, with the economics that play a big part into that, and in combination also with the regulatory framework we're operating in. So it's a combination of all these three parameters that tends to block each other out, or slow this process down. And it's not just one of those three parameters that is the major culprit, right? So we have to work on all three levels to make a faster progress. But I agree, it's the speed is not high enough to implement those new concepts that comply with the circular economy assumptions and prospects that we want. Yeah.
So if we wanted to speed it up, I'm going to come to Rinus, because you're there in the thick of it. You're already doing quite a lot from what you've presented, but how could the industry in general, maybe not your company specifically, but how could the industry in general speed up this more circular use of refractory materials at the end of their life?
That's a little bit difficult one to answer, I think. And Muiden is a little bit strange situation because we have our own brick plant, and we also spend still a lot of research on refractories, and that's for the steelmaker already a little bit strange. The advantage is if you have that knowledge, it's also easier to see where you can use those materials with recycling in it. If you look at other steel plants, they hardly have any research facilities on refractories anymore. They leave it completely to refractory suppliers, but the problem of refractory suppliers is that a lot of time they don't know enough about the process to understand what are the possibilities and also what are the risks. And that's where I'm coming back also a little bit back to the communication. If we really want to speed up, there should be a better communication between refractory suppliers. They should be a little bit more open about what they put in their products, even if they don't like that always to do. But the same for the steel steel producers. They sometimes should simply tell a little bit what they need, and they should give a little bit openness about the process and making sure that refractory suppliers have more knowledge of what is possible in the steel plant.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned, Rinus, that there were some advantages of using recycled refractory material, and it was not only that it brought the price down, but if I understood correctly, it did something to enhance the product. Could you speak a bit more to that, what those benefits look like?
Let's say in this case, what we are doing is that we use a recycling material that comes from a completely different application we are using for the bottom of the ladles. By using that recycling material, the density of our bricks goes down, and means so at the end that our ladle becomes lighter. That advantage simply gives that we can put in more steel into the ladle, which is absolutely a big benefit for us. Would you have done that with virgin material? First, those materials are very expensive if you want to buy them as virgin raw materials. But one of the reasons it gives also a lower density is because the recycling material is not as good and has more fines in it, which makes it a little bit less easy to make a dense brick out of it, which in our case, it's a positive effect.
Okay, thank you. What about the EU position here? Do you think that the European Union can overcome member states' reluctance to create a real common market for secondary materials? I know, Giel, you're the waste expert. Is that something that you could speak to? Is there a reluctance in the member states to create a common market for secondary materials? First of all, let's test the assumption.
Yeah, that's. I don't know if I can agree with that hypothesis. What I can say is what we are trying to do is to make sure that there's a market for secondary raw materials through the initiatives that I mentioned before. So yeah, I can only say that, I'm afraid.
That's okay. What about the industry speakers? Because I imagine that's a sense that you have that that there is a challenge. I've heard that coming up in the presentations. There is a bit of a challenge about transporting materials or different regulation in different member states. Is there anyone on the panel that could explain a bit more about that?
I can try.
Thank you.
I think there are more and more concerns, which I can fully understand within the public about hazardous materials. And the chemical legislation is getting tighter and tighter. The quantities of some materials that you are allowed to have in waste is getting lower and lower. So if we do not find good common sense, because to master this, yeah, as you know, any material, even water, is hazardous if you take too much of it. When you have very little percentages of some material, the level of risk is usually nil. It's even in nature, if they are hazardous material, it's because also they are useful. So we need to have bring reason in the way we use chemical legislations. If we don't want to create obstacles that becomes really difficult to overcome in developing recycling.
Does anyone else from industry have a perspective on that? That you know, there are some challenges around the definitions of hazardous materials, or perhaps the limits that are allowed to be used or transported. Is that a common issue? Christian, would you have anything on that?
It is actually a common issue. Yes, that's true. I'd like to support what Patrick just said. And it just the difference is, that one material could be considered as a raw material in one state and be even a hazardous waste in another one, even though it's the very same material, can become very, very difficult to just the administration of it and the logistics of it, to reuse it and to transport it, and in that case, the safe place is always, to use the virgin material, because you don't have this burden there, and you don't have also the corresponding costs that come with it to those virgin materials, and you have the consistency, you have the availability, and so there are all those advantages that kick in of the virgin material that make it very, very hard to switch over then to a recycled material where you have those unknowns, where you have those obstacles to tackle, which we are not afraid to tackle those obstacles, but it always comes with a price tag. And as Rino said, he's mainly interested in the most affordable product. So and then he shows low interest, in if I want to sell him a product where I can say, look, has a high amount of recycled material, but it comes out with an additional price tag, and then that's the major issue. And for now, like I said, the safe track is go with the virgin material, where my customer knows what's in it, where I know where I am. So that's where the trouble then starts.
I don't know, Giel, if you're going to be able to say anything on that. It sounds more like a sort of chemicals legislation issue, but if you want to jump in, you're very welcome.
Yeah, I have to admit, I understand these issues. I have to admit that I'm not working on these topics myself. So we are looking into the waste shipment regulation as well at the moment. We have, of course, the chemicals and waste interface going on. But given the fact that I had very little time to prepare, I did not prepare and look into this. No,
that's absolutely fine. I mean, I had a curiosity when I heard the speakers, because it sounded like there's not a local market for these materials. Like, just the fact that you would need to transport them from one member state to another, that made me wonder a little bit about how the industry is organized. Is there a local market for those waste materials? No. Rinus is shaking his head. So would you literally take waste materials from another country and bring them to the Netherlands, to IJmuiden, and put them into your process?
No, to make it easier, we buy our refractories from Japan, China, Australia, Germany. So we buy refractories all over the world. So I can't imagine that the refractory waste would be then a local market like the Netherlands, or even the Netherlands and Germany.
Okay, that's interesting. Christian, I think you were wanting to jump in.
Actually, no, I don't have. I think my colleagues said it very well. It's.
Okay, that's fine. What's the biggest challenge for refractories to become more circular? Because you said there are obstacles and we're willing to overcome them, but obviously price is really important. What would you say is the biggest challenge?
For me, I think it's the consistency. It's in fact the consistency. I mean, consistency in availability and quality and cost. So it's across the board. So it's the biggest challenge is to establish a consistent stream of predictable material with predictable cost, quality, and availability, and so that we can also Rinus pointed that very well. He's interested in not perhaps just the super duper best refractory, but what he needs is a consistent quality that makes it very predictable, for his process, how his process will react to it. So, and I think that's to achieve that level. That's the biggest challenge probably.
Okay. Anyone else have a different biggest challenge that they'd like to share?
I'd be happy to build upon what Christian just said, making a parallel with renewable energies. As we all know, renewable energies also present a consistency problem because they are subjects to weather patterns, whether there is sun, whether there is wind, etc. And they have the same challenge as we have to recycle refractories, which is that they are cheaper when the oil price is very high, and they are more expensive when the oil price is low. So the way Europe and others have succeeded in developing the renewable energy sector is by having clear policy incentives to make it happen. Down to consumers, which are incentivized to use green energy. And to create the same type of consistency on the supply chain, on the economics for refractories, we need the same type of policy.
So you need the same type of policy of support, of subsidies and support as renewable energies has received. Is that what you're saying?
As industrial people, we don't like the word subsidies that much, but we need a framework that economically works.
So we're talking incentives more than subsidies.
I'm happy to discuss this further with European authorities. And at the end of the day, what will allow to develop recycling like renewable energies that have been developed is a consistent way to support this effort.
Okay, wonderful. Anybody got any final thoughts that they want to share? Because we're coming to the end of the Q&A. I have a couple more minutes just in case you have a burning comment that you want to share with the audience. I've got lots of questions that are going off in a more technical direction, and so I've not brought them because I think it's not as inclusive for all of our speakers, but I'm sure that you'll be able to read the questions and perhaps answer some of them later on. Any final thoughts from the panel? Oh, then I would like to thank our panelists. Don't go anywhere. You can put your cameras off, apart from Patrick, because Patrick is going to give us now some concluding remarks. As I mentioned before, he's the president of PRE, the European Refractories Producers Federation. So Patrick, I believe you had some concluding remarks for us.
Thank you, Kathleen. My first comment is that things are not black and white. We are doing recycling today, and we would like to do more. When it's integrated in a steel mill, as it is done at High Maiden, it's easier. You can check things within known loop. As soon as it goes outside the proximity of using plant, it becomes more difficult. You have to cross borders. And here starts the regulatory hurdles. We are all for overcoming these hurdles. We would by far prefer more recycling, which would ensure more security of supplies that depending the way we do currently from China and other faraway sources for virgin raw materials. But this is a consistent effort, a joint effort. This requires a joint effort between the industries and authorities to make it happen, like such an effort has been led for renewable energies. Beyond this effort and all the benefits we can draw from it, I would like to insist on something which is maybe not very well known, which is that as an industry, refractories are hugely contributing to sustainability. And if we could have a look at the slides that I've prepared to support this point. Here it comes. You can see on the left part of this slide the curves in kilos per ton of steel produced of the consumption of refractories in the steel industries. As you see, it has been divided by 5 in the past 50 to 60 years as part of a joint effort between the steel makers and the refractory makers to find more efficient processes and better refractories. And this goes on. I was pleased to hear Rinus mention earlier on during this call that High Meridian is using not 10 kilos per refractory per ton of steel, but 7 kilos. And our research and development efforts continue in this respect. And beyond this decreased use of refractories, I would like, on the right part of this slide, to insist that on the way refractories contribute to a greener world. First, they allow to reduce material losses and the CO2 emissions at our customers. And Rinus mentioned some of that. Second, and even more importantly, because the whole process becomes more efficient, steel makers, foundries can produce more resistant products and hence lighter products, which makes lighter vehicles. And as we know, weight is a major source of fuel consumption. So lighter planes, lighter cars, lighter trucks globally contribute to the greener world we are all yearning for. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for putting that into the broader context of sustainability. Let's get all of our speakers back with their cameras on and just do a very quick wrap up. So this has been a really interesting series of webinars about the ceramic industry and the circular economy. If you'd like to revisit any of those videos, they are on YouTube. And we've talked about the opportunities presented by the circular economy. We've talked about sustainable construction. And today, the importance of refractories and how they can boost the competitiveness of those energy-intensive industries. Well, it's been my pleasure to moderate this series of webinars, and I'd like to thank all of our speakers today, Patrick, Christian, Giel, and Rinus, and of course, Susanna, who had to leave us. Also like to thank Cerame-Unie and the audience. You've shown up and you've been with us on this journey. So that brings us to the end of the series. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.